Hi guys, welcome back to Russian Libertas Corpus YouTube channel. That's the place where we, Alexei Postnikov and Gala Bogatova, talking about Russian politics, Russian society, any other issues. Finally, we're gonna make the video where we answering the questions from our comment section. Sorry it took us so long. It was a busy
We collected
time.
some. We needed to collect some.
Yes, that's also true. We're gonna talk about them briefly, but if you feel like, oh, interesting, I want to know more about this, let us know, and at some point we'll make a standalone, bigger video addressing this specific issue. So, should we start?
Absolutely.
Congrats on a new channel. That's from our
Thank
first
you.
video. Thank you so much. Also, please subscribe to our new channel.
And also leave
so you
comments.
can grow. Yes. Okay. Two things caught my attention, among others. You mentioned independent media. Is there such a thing? Seems that media is never fully independent. Also, you mentioned segregation in Russia. I don't think it ever existed in Russia in a way it was in the US. Not sure this term can be used when speaking about Russia and its history, or else it needs the explanation. So how about we'll separate...
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, according to the expertise.
The question about the independent media in Russia is pretty tough, and it's a really, really long talk. But long story short, at some point, even under Putin's regime, there were a lot of independent media outlets in Russia because they were based in internet. If we're talking about the last 15 years, maybe even last 20 years, because internet in Russia was pretty much a free space up until early 2010s. So like until first internet censorship legislation that passed in 2012, internet was like completely, limitless, free and without censorship. So media could afford to be as open, as honest as they can be, to be respectable among the public, and therefore, get the traffic and exist. That's a standard media model these days, I think. And in Russia, I would say it was blooming up until 2012, and then starting 2012, it was like big attack on government on Russian internet. So the process of suppressing internet media started 2012, and by now, I would say all independent media based in Russia were completely destroyed. The ones that still have head offices in Russia cannot be independent at all. You cannot say this word. They depend on regime like a lot. Now it's basically, if you say something wrong, you're gonna go in prison. Before the war started, it was more, carrots and sticks. So it was like more carrots, less sticks. So basically, government was buying off a lot of journalists, a lot of media. Some were violently, taken over. Like, for example, Lenta.ru, Lenta.ru. That was the biggest news media of early 2010s. Incredibly influential, independent, very good journalism. In 2014, soon after the whole Crimea annexation and the turmoil another wave of like perjury and repression within Russia, while one of the victims of that perjury was Lenta.ru. I mean, this website and this media outlet still exists, but in 2014, the chief editor was deposed, replaced, and the whole collective all the journalists left with her, and now they making another media called Medusa. So Medusa is one of the sources you can trust when you're reading news in Russia, and they have version in English, so that's very fortunate, I think. Along with other foreign-based, foreign from Russia, based media outlets that also have English version. That's going to be my recommendation for Russian independent media right now. Media you can trust. It's Medusa, it's Media Zona, and Holod. And I'm going to put these three links in the description. So please be careful with news sources from Russia or concerning Russia, because just separating actual facts and information from bullshit propaganda, hysteria, or wishful thinking, which is it's a big job. So please remember that. It was like kind of a long story short. It kind of got a little bit long.
A long story long.
A long story long. And it might be much longer because the history. I used to work for Echo of Moscow, which was a radio station in Russia, and I saw its slow decline and fall into from being kind of independent, at least maybe not financially independent, but in terms of internal policy, like editorial policies, fairly independent, from this point to being some sort of I don't know even how to describe it,
like a puppet,
like a half and half mix of independent and giving the platform to opposition to
so it
speak
got
to.
infiltrated by.
Yeah, and that's, if you're interested, I can share my experience with Echo of Moscow from inside a little bit, so let us know. But yeah, long story short, there were few fairly independent media in the beginning of 2010s. By now they all gone, or they're based not in Russia. So that's my answer.
That was very interesting, actually. I would love to hear more about your experience with Echo.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe you should leave a comment, and then
I will leave a comment.
we'll make a video
now
about
I have
it.
a task, homework to do.
Okay, so your part of the question is about
segregation. Yeah.
segregation, because in the first video when we were talking about Russian colonialism and
I
how
mentioned
weird
the
it is,
segregation, racial segregation in Russia, and our esteemed subscriber mentioned that the segregation actually never existed in Russia, right? And it should not be used in the context of Russian social hierarchy. Right? So first of all, thank you so much for the comment, and thank you for actually listening to me. Here we are talking about defining the terms. So as I mentioned in the video, of course, I admit that racial hierarchy functions in a slightly different way in Russia. Indeed, it was not it was not legitimately framed bureaucratically as it was, for example, in the United States in the period of slavery. It was bureaucratically framed during the Russian Empire, though.
True. We had so-called the line of settlement, I guess that's going to be an English term, for basically Jewish subjects of Russian Empire.
Yes, Caucasian, Jewish. We had some Siberian peoples also had their own. They even, at a certain point of history, they even paid a different kind of tax. They would be taxed by goods, by certain goods.
Right.
So there was Russian Empire knows the experience of racial segregation being actually formulated in the documents. That's a fact. That's a historical fact. If we would like to know about this a little more, I can elaborate in the next video. Please leave the comment. But as per now, during the Soviet times, This was, of course, canceled, and the Brotherhood of Nations was proclaimed as something legitimately framed in the written sources. However, I wouldn't say, as I mentioned in the video, however, I wouldn't say that it was actually anti-racist. I would say it was colorblind instead, because of the Russification of schools in all the regions and canceling the native languages of the people, local peoples, as something secondary or absent altogether, is extremely, racist, and it is a segregation, because you segregate certain ethnicity with their language, with their race and appearance, from from the access to certain levels of power. So that is a segregation, in my opinion. And in my when I say segregation in the Russian context, I would like you to broaden up this understanding, this concept a little bit, because what it is to segregate people is to put certain people in one place and others in a different place, and discriminate them according to their identity. Is it a woman? Is it a Russian woman? Is it a Russian white woman? Is she heterosexual? Right? So in terms of race, for example, for the most part, if I'm not mistaken, if you look at our parliament, would you see a lot of Burats or representatives of Republic?
We would say, oh, that's interesting, because in Russian parliament you would see a lot of people from Chechnya. You know why? Because we have the practice of so-called electoral sultanates, where certain regions, for example, Chechnya, Dagestan, it's a lot of ethnic republics, and some other Russian regions,
right.
They just throwing or just like drawing the number for the votes for Russia United, the party of power, and because they just making the results of Russia United in Chechnya is like 99%, so it's much bigger than the other regions. That's why they get bigger quota for their representatives in the parliament. I wouldn't say it's the good way of representation, though.
I mean, yeah, that's this region has a certain political power, especially after the ongoing wars there.
Yeah.
They establish themselves as somebody who you should be actually talking to, in a way.
Maybe we can make another video about Chechnya, let us know. Because I think it's a really complex topic, especially how it is now, because now it has to do way less with ethnicity and, but, so yeah, it's really complex.
It's not about ethnicity, it's territorial, it's political, but anyways, the fact that this exists doesn't mean that it actually means that that this community is diverse, right? It's not.
No.
And when
the small question, would you say that, because maybe that was kind of the gist of the question, if Russian segregation that exists in Russia now is based on some sort of the racial, theories, because in the United States, there was like big theoretical work backing up this whole segregation thing, and slavery before that.
Right.
So, because we didn't have this in Russia, we had like other, bad stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, in terms of race, and like a straightforward segregation according to the race during the Soviet Union, no, there was none.
Except Jewish a little bit.
Except Jewish, probably, but it's not. There was not really overpowering the narrative of equality and brotherhood of people, of nations. Even though the practices were pretty segregating, the legislation was not. At the same time, when you have an extremely discriminatory practices, for example, Russians, it can be also day-to-day life. For example, I rent a house, please only Slavic people, right? That's like a routine racism.
Okay, so next question. Do you have an understanding of the different regions' attitude to war, how it changes from Eastern to Western Russia? And I think this questions again references a little bit our video about colonialism. So just watch it, please. Also, in a way, it's really hard to say because in Russia we don't have separation of maybe identity, regional identity, the same way, for example, United States has with East Coast, West Coast, Midwest. They all have sort of a. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, because I've been here only for 5 years. It's a different.
Mentality,
maybe stereotypes
yeah, mentality.
or the culture and political culture overall. Also North and South, well, all that stuff. In Russia, it's much more of, I would maybe call it, for some reason I just thought about Jackson Pollock. So that reminds me of Jackson Pollock splatters because, it's kind of like this, and we can have a big splatter of for example, Yekaterinburg, the city I'm from, historically, in the modern Russian history, it was the most liberal city in the country. But it was in the middle of, Urals next to Siberia. And if you look at the map, it's like, so that's Moscow. And it's like, whoop, and like something, 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 Yekaterinburg. Then Siberia is like forests and whatever. And around it, there were way more loyal regions to regime. They were regions that on the fence, and the same I think with war. We cannot just simply put, Western Russia is kind of against the war more, and then Eastern Russia is pro-war or something like that. It just we can just not say that. I would say maybe people from big cities.
Yes, because we touched upon this in the last video about is Russia still a colonial empire, where you rightfully mentioned that colonial nature of Russia looks more like the metropolis is actually Moscow and St. Petersburg. And then the entire country itself looks like a colony a little bit, just to the same extent as the borderland countries. So in this case, I think it has its historical replication, the modern picture of it, that indeed it is not even, first of all, we don't have the data that is reliable enough for us to affirm that this region has a certain percent of support, that region is that, because even if we had that, it's not a reliable data because nobody would actually speak up.
Right. We can kind of maybe we can talk about trends, and also a little bit spoiler, we want to make a video about an interesting, social statistics and sociology in Russia that shows that this war is kind of an abnormal
a very abnormal
thing for Russian society.
For any society in general.
Yeah.
But that's a different story. Right now we're talking about regions, and I would say that I have no answer to that, and I'm not sure if somebody gives you an answer, you should trust that like 90%, because it is just a very vague situation anywhere, even in the capitals. But what I think is, usually it's conventionally implied that people who have lower education, less money, they would be more compliant with the authority policies, and they would voluntarily maybe subscribe, or they just have no other choice. They're vulnerable and they don't want to resist. In this case, particularly, the poor chunk of population, which is the majority, they're not supportive. In fact, their silence doesn't mean that they support it. Their silence just means the fear. And it's easier to subscribe yourself to the death that is planned and strategically executed by somebody stronger than you than challenge that authority and die this way. It takes guts and brain. And if you don't have that conditionally, because you're coming from a background of vulnerable people, you would probably, it's easier to die the way that is compliant, at least. That
sounds really sad, but also true.
I mean, it's not necessarily true, it's just my opinion. That's how I see the situation. But I would not dare to say that a certain region supports war more than the other. And I don't really, I don't know if right now somebody can extract an extremely reliable information about that. But I would assume the poorer you are, the more distant you are, the more ignorant, even the more ignorant you are, you would probably not see the value of this war even then, because this war is the war of, interestingly enough, rich and old people.
Yeah, which is, yeah, that's why it's so abnormal to any other big war in the history.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what we want to make a big video about it. So also thank you for asking. You kind of give us a hint in a way to make this in a full video. So we'll definitely do that. And should we address other questions in the part 2 of
I think that, first of all, I'm so grateful to see that you guys are actually interacting. That's so exciting. I strongly encourage you to continue that, and I think that the questions our subscribers deserve a much more like particular attention. So I suggest that next week we're going to address the rest of the comments, because they really require some in-depth answers, and you guys are, you know, extremely prepared. I know that. So please go ahead and interact.
Yeah, and also don't stop yourself from asking the questions, you know, in the comments for this video, although it was answer for the questions.
The questions should reproduce the question. That's how.
Yeah, that's our pyramid scheme that we're running here. Yeah, well, thank you so much for your time. Hope to see you next time here. Check out all the links below, the video in the whatever this thing is, the notes,
somewhere
whatever.
In the air.
And of course, like this video, subscribe to the channel, share this video with your friends, family, and people who want to know more about Russia or make weird statements, uninformed statements about Russia. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.